Berserkers have always been an entertaining class type, with a high-risk, high-reward design that can result in some absurdly high damage values. I think this design has only gotten more interesting throughout the series, with reclassing and various performance-boosting tools letting the player minimize Berserker's risks while pushing its damage values even further. In this video, I'd like to show off a few Berserker builds I've used, demonstrating what it took to get the build going, how I utilized the unit in my strategies, and offer some suggestions for potential improvements. As always, my builds are meant to demonstrate how you can train units to be both entertaining and high-performing under one's personal playstyle, rather than answering what a unit's or class's best option is. That being said, let's go ahead and get started.
Time for your final bow! My heart is singing. Farewell.
First up is Dodgetank Berserker Azura from Fate's Conquest. Azura is widely known as one of the best units in Fates, as well as for having some absurdly high combat stats. Of course, these are not typically related, with their standout feature being an early joining dancer. Paired with Fates' movement tech and the ability to get multiple dances with shelter, she brings utility as a songstress that's both extremely impactful and unique to her. On the other hand, no combat contribution is truly irreplaceable in Fates, but if you're looking for a unit that doubles and hits hard, Azura can reach those thresholds with some of the least investment. Compared to the other unpromoted recruits, her 50% personal strength growth and 60% personal speed growth is only really matched by Effie, Perry, and Charlotte. As for her personal bases, she's by far the fastest of the physical units when at the same level, with only Charlotte and Perry going to be stronger while still having above average speed. She even matches Camilla pretty closely, and is both stronger and way faster than Xander. Provided that we find some way to mitigate her absolutely pitiful HP and defense, her synergy with Berserker should allow for some pretty insane combat potential. Joining in Chapter 9, Azura has a long way to go. However, finding opportunities for her to get kills and or dual strikes works out just fine, as she can actually do decent damage, and having her occasionally get a kill instead of singing really just prevents you from staying on LTC pace, rather than immediately grinding your pace to a halt. I got her D-rank lances by Chapter 11, giving her javelin access for dual strike flexibility. By Chapter 13, she had already reached level 15, and while she could have reclassed into fighter by this point with an S-support with Korn or Arthur, I wanted her to S-support the third fighter option, Keaton, to give him Skyknight access. This delayed her reclass by several chapters, with Keaton only joining in Chapter 14, but since we didn't go with the immediate reclass, we might as well wait until she reaches level 21 in her unique class, so she can partner seal directly into the promoted Berserker. Chapter 15 is commonly known as a last-minute training ground for Korn, but it's also a great opportunity to train up Azura, since her replica in the south can't sing anyway, and actually helps a lot if you think to use her. This is especially true if you get Azura D-rank lances, as she can get a lot of finishing blows or even one-shots with the Javelin and Korn's dual strike. And again, because she can't sing anyway, this only serves to fasten your pace, rather than slow it down. Even if you don't plan to extensively use Azura as a combat unit going forward, it's still a simple goal that makes the map a lot more engaging. With the extra training, Azura was mostly just waiting for Keaton's S-support to reclass, so I had her continue to fight with Keaton in some paralogs. Despite all the levels, her damage isn't spectacular while in Songstress, but it's good enough for some dual strike OHKOs and picking up some promoted kills. By Chapter 18, she and Keaton reach their S-support, and now Berserker Azura may finally commence. Chapter 18 is a pretty good first showing for her, being able to one-round the paladins even with a bronze axe. However, here we can see just how impactful her low bulk is, as she dies in just 2 hits. Luckily, her huge speed and luck, paired with weapon triangle advantage, means she only faces around 30 hits, and when you're doubling in guard stance, you effectively only risk taking damage every other attack, thanks to how guard gauge works out. So, despite sub-50 hit rates only using 1 RN in Fates, I figured her odds of survival against multiple enemies would be satisfactory for me. I was immediately humbled by getting hit twice in a row on my first attempt, but this did make me consider another way to further increase Avoid, the My Castle Frying Pan drop. It's basically a weaker Bronze Axe with +10 Avoid, which is perfect for Azura, who's actually a bit overkill with a Bronze Axe, and can face hit rates in the 10s and 20s with it. Regardless of whether you want to pull off flashy enemy face sweeps though, just being in Berserker let her start providing some pretty strong dual strikes, or pair up with Keaton to provide a huge strength boost. Both of these damage boosting aspects proved to be very useful as they reclassed Keaton into Kinshi Knight. From here, I had a lot of other builds that I wanted to get running, and Azura was honestly a bit overleveled from rushing Berserker, so she ironically still ended up playing more of a supporting role for a few chapters. Still, she got her first levels in Berserker in chapter 19, learning HP plus 5 to help her face 3 shots rather than 2 shots, and proved to be a very effective answer to Kaden. He's got quite the foxy avoid, but Azura's massive skill and ability to one-round with the ever so accurate frying pan let her cleanly one-round. Chapter 20 was probably the highlight for Berserker Azura, at least in terms of enemy phasing. The right side of the map has a ton of Spear Masters, Great Masters, and Falcon Knights with lances, meaning Azura gets weapon triangle and can face hit rates around the 30s. She reaches the damage threshold to one round even with the frying pan, and even with Keaton providing Kinshi Knight pair-up stats, so I was able to fly her to the southeast turn 1. Unfortunately, the winds didn't align to let her reach the group north of her turn 2, but Keaton was able to fly her there turn 3, just in time to intercept the Falcon Knight reinforcements that spawn after you reach the northwestern platform. With so many enemies, this was one of the riskier sweeps, but being able to survive 2 hits thanks to HP plus 5, along with guard gauge, made it reasonable enough for me. With the concoction turn 4, she was able to do it all over again, cleaning up the remaining enemies that had been paired up turn 3. The rest of my army took a bit more time to clean up the enemies in the west and approach Fuga, with an overall lack of flyers and, obviously, Dancer, but I still got everyone to the throne by turn 13, with Azura's huge skill and accurate weapon choices again being great for killing a typically dodgy boss. Chapter 21 wasn't so conducive towards enemy phasing, but Azura still one-rounded Faceless and provided an important rally strength for Xander. Chapter 22, I switched Azura to hero alongside Keaton, and the two of them helped fight the blacksmiths in the west. Nothing too flashy, but they did learn Soul throughout the process, whose high proc rate in the hands of Azura gives her another decent boost to her survivability. Chapter 23 was mostly just providing rally strength, but she also performed exceptionally well in some occasional filler combat moments. Chapter 24 is the last huge map for enemy phasing, with several Falcon Knights she can easily one-round while facing lowish hit rates. I left her and Keaton in charge of the western border, spawn camping some reinforcements to get the 2 Bolt Naginata kills on player phase, then the 2 Silver Naginata kills on enemy phase. I could have done something similar for the northwestern reinforcements, but I opted to leave Azura paired up with Keaton. This provided a huge strength and speed boost as he performed his own Dodgetank Soul Sweep, having gotten air superiority from his S-support with Azura. Even without Azura singing, I still pushed my other units around the whole map fast enough to rout and seize by turn 8. For Chapter 25, I had other plans to sweep the Master Ninjas in the east, but Azura was certainly able to one-shot some in the west. Chapter 26, Azura mostly played support for Keaton, as he swept the heroes with his naturally solid bulk and soul. I decided to go through the monster room for the extra challenge, letting Azura get entrapped south to one-round the maid and nearby Faceless, as to keep my plan for the actual Stoneborn and monster room intact. When handling the generals and berserkers, Azura finally reached C-axes. Yeah, all her hit rates so far have only been with E and D rank bonuses, but C rank does mean she gets to wield the dual club, just in time to demolish Iago. Oh, and for one last challenge, I did the Secret Paralog, giving this amazing screenshot of unassisted Azura one-rounding a Great Knight with the frying pan. Before moving on to the final battle, I had one more power-up in mind for Azura, giving her all 3 arm scrolls to reach S-axes and the ability to wield the newly acquired Olgamir. Its absurd 22 might, on top of Azura's almost capped strength, Axe Fair, and Keaton pair-up, let her just straight up OHKO the Lancers in Chapter 27, working around the typically annoying counter. Even before the Lancers, she performed very well, one-rounding the Warding Blow Spearfighters with just 1 dodge, who I've also found to be very tricky to handle in my previous playthroughs. Azura wasn't relevant for my initial endgame clear, in which I had witched Nina warp to Takumi, but I did fit in a dual strike for her, so she could reach level 20 and officially reach her strength cap of 40. However, looking back, I wasn't satisfied with this being Berserker Azura's end. So I went back and figured out a clear that got Azura to kill Takumi turn 1. Even without the typical damage boosting skills like Life and Death, Trample, and Spendthrift, I was still able to get the kill with just 1 of 2 30% Olgamir crits. Overall, I was pretty happy with Azura's performance in Berserker, despite its reputation as a joke and not even fully committing to it. As strong of a tool Refreshing is considered to be, I have to say that I didn't really feel the absence of Songstress Azura that strongly. Shelter can kind of recreate the instance of Refreshing so units can get an additional player phase kill, and you never really need units to move further than their full move to manage even the tightest of side objectives. And if you have access to Warp, then units don't need Songstress Azura to pull off crazy movement anyways. If you wanted Azura to perform even stronger in Berserker, you could always reclass her earlier, choosing Corrin or Arthur as her friendship or as support partner. This would potentially get you into Fighter by her and Corrin's training arc in Chapter 15, giving more time to build up Axe rank and make use of Fighter's higher strength growth. You could also get some more skills, getting air superiority from Kinchi Knight to help dodge tank Falcon Knights, Tonebreaker from Maid with Elise Friendship, or Lucky 7 from Niles. Corrin can also just get her Samurai, so she can Vantage Sweep everything with a forged hand axe. Not that she needs Vantage, of course, as with a little luck, she's already set to be accurately one-rounding or OHKOing everything in Conquest. Next, I'd like to briefly discuss two War Master builds from three houses, using Sylvain and Caspar as endgame boss killers. Specifically, the goal was to consistently defeat certain bosses in Chapter 22 of Verdant Wind for a one-turn clear. War Master may not be a Berserker in name, but conceptually serves the same role, with the highest strength of all classes and the crit plus 20 skill. As such, I'm sure you can imagine why it would be a strong pick for killing the toughest bosses of three houses. Verdant Wind's endgame only requires you to defeat Nemesis, but if you can also defeat his 10 elites, then the kill thresholds become a lot more reasonable. For anyone who isn't named Lysithea, of course. I left Sylvain in charge of the Dark Knight Bladed, with his boons letting him pretty easily pick up the necessary skills. Bladed is the one elite that infantry units can reach without needing to be in the stride position, or use an action to reposition them, being only 6 tiles away from the nearest starting position. However, 2 of these tiles are forests, so if we want to attack at one range, we actually need 7 movements, which War Master can reach with the skill Movement plus 1. Alternatively, grapplers aren't impeded by forests and don't need any movement boosting, but the trade-off for relying on the Fierce Iron Fist one round is that you need a lot more strength than with a Killer Axe crit because of Gauntlet's lower might. To learn Movement plus 1, we need to reach A plus Riding. We also want A plus Axes for Axe Prowess level 5, ideally S for Axe Crit plus 10, at least B Brawl to certify for War Master, and either B or A Authority for either the Goneril Valkyries or Index Swordfighters Battalion. This is a fair amount, giving a lot of value to having the relevant boons, especially in riding, and an early join time. So, altogether, Sylvain is one of our best candidates. Rather than incessantly tutoring his riding rank throughout the playthrough, I decided to get Movement plus 1 out of the way early, going through Cavalier and Paladin in the mid-game, maximizing the Knowledge Gem and LTC grinding strats to get him Movement plus 1 by Chapter 11. He then switched to Warrior for time skip, and eventually War Master after getting it enough Brawl rank, mostly taking on filler combat roles. As such, rushing Movement plus 1 was never largely impactful, but I will say it came into play for a couple one-turns, where I challenged myself to also get all side objectives, with his slight magical competency, letting him kill Fortress Knights in Chapter 17 at 2 range with a Bolt Axe, and his huge player phase presence clearing the way to Chapter 20's Chest Room. By Chapter 22, he got all the way to level 40 and reached S Axes. This meant he was strong enough to not even need Deathblow or Strength plus 2, and instead could slot in Axe Crit plus 10. Alongside the hit boost from Axe Prowess level 5, Lancebreaker, and hit plus 20, he got all the way up to 92 hits and 86 crits. If you think S Axes is too much to expect, then you could go with Deathblow instead, which would also lower the strength threshold pretty close to War Master's base. Of course, the highlight of the clear is the Nemesis killer, Caspar. The kill thresholds for Nemesis are much higher, even without any of the stat boost from the 10 elites, and he has a substantial 49 avoid and 52 dodge. His Stronghold gives him an additional 30 avoid, and Keen Intuition gives yet another 30 at range. This means we want a strong, accurate, high crit one-range attacker. Ideally, they also have some way to double, with much higher odds of landing one of 2 weaker crits, rather than one strong one. War Master gives the highest strength boost, crit plus 20 and fist fair. Caspar specifically gives us a unit with high strength to reach the damage threshold, competent dex and luck for high hits and crits, Born Fighter to lower Nemesis's avoid, and a Brawl boon that makes learning an additional Fist Fair at S plus Brawl reasonable. He also learns the combat art Bombard for another plus 3 attack and 10 crit, while still utilizing Brawl's Brave effect. With this, he still needs 11 points of strength from stat boosters, on average at level 40, to reach the crit plus hit damage threshold of 27. This sounds like a lot, but is actually just about what even Claude expects to require for a less consistent Nemesis skill. Another sticking point is reaching S plus Brawl in the first place. Again, even Claude requires S plus for his weapon rank, but Brawl is conceptually trickier to get a lot of skill points for, given its focus on player phase. However, I found that Gauntlet's damage output holds up just fine when going for OHKOs with Vantage Wrath, especially when considering that Caspar is getting a ton of strength boosters. Being one range locked also doesn't matter once the Gambit Retribution comes into play, with its counterattack effect coming as early as Chapter 8. As such, Caspar got to enemy phase sweep a ton of chapters in which I had the goal of routing under a minimal turns restriction, while also getting to use his great player face presence as a War Master for some flashy one-turns. Sometimes he was completely overkill, in which switching to a mounted class would potentially be better after learning Fistfare, but keeping him in War Master gave a lot of fun Berserker-like moments while still functioning very well. As one final concern, getting Caspar to reach Nemesis while fitting in with the rest of the clear's already rather ambitious movement sounds like a bit too much to ask. However, I worked out getting all the 10 elites kills with 2 actions to spare and no warp, letting me get away with Lysithea using her 12 range warp to get Caspar all the way from a starting position to reaching Nemesis. This does mean no special dance, dex, and luck boost, but his Bombard 1-round KO is already very consistent by Nemesis standards, with roughly an 88% chance of success. All in all, War Masters may not be crucial for every boss in 3 houses, but their huge strength and crit does let them get away with some pretty crazy kills. There are certainly alternatives for the specific boss kills I presented, but I find War Masters generally need the same or even less investment than other builds, while having even greater consistency. Caspar and Sylvain's ease of access to the class, while also being able to go above and beyond for skills like Movement +1 and Fistfare, is just icing on the cake. Now, let's move on to our final barbaric build.
Do you know what you are, Alfred? A barbarian in princess clothing.
Huh, what a nice thing to say. Thanks, Saline.
How did that strike you as a compliment?
You meant that I've got muscles all over like a barbarian, right? Pretty soon, I'll be so beefy that everyone can tell right off what a barbarian I am. Scatter like petals. Wither and fall. I'll cut you down. For Firene. I'm getting sleepy.
Fulfilling his beefy aspirations, we have Berserker Alfred, pulling off a tank OHKO build with Tiki. This one has a lot of separate pieces working together, between the character, emblem, class, and skills, and while there's a lot of flexibility in our exact approach, the general idea is to get a unit with good enough defenses to survive several enemies on their own, while maintaining high damage output, ideally getting OHKOs for both player phase and enemy phase. Alfred has a poor reputation as a unit, with personal bases and growth rates that give him all-around solid physical combat stats, but none that are the highest in any one area. This makes him look less appealing if we're looking for a unit with the most strength or the most defense, but the great thing about this build is we actually want a well-rounded stat spread, at which point our other choices will push us to be great at all of them. The other nice part about Alfred is that he gets to start contributing right away, joining in Chapter 3. If left completely alone, he obviously doesn't look great for long, but his solid bulk and offense, paired with high movement, makes him one of the stronger early-game emblem recipients. I went with the standard but very effective Sigurd option this run, up until Tiki became available after Chapter 6. And yeah, he was getting OHKOs, sometimes multiple at a time with Override, and just generally being great for tanking various enemies. After leading the charge in the Tiki paralogue, and helping me win before the reinforcements caught up, I went ahead and made just a quick detour to experience the Fel Xenologue for the first time. It was rough, to say the least, having chosen to play on Maddening, but Alfred made some parts slightly tolerable. In Chapter 1, Alfred can tank the wolves fairly well, and with both Divinely Inspiring and his personal skill active, gets a +5 damage boost that lets him OHKO all the level 15 corrupted wolves. He was also just a massive help in fighting the boss, being able to hold him off at a choke point while still getting solid damage off. Chapter 2 was a little less flashy, but Fire Breath's burst damage proved to be a huge help, with some pretty dense enemy formations, but not a lot of units to fight them on each half of the map. Chapter 3 was an absolute mess, but being able to hold a choke point for the first few turns, while again getting off big chip damage on multiple enemies at once, made it somewhat bearable. Tiki Alfred wasn't incredibly impactful for the final set of maps, but regardless, I pushed through them and finally got back to the main story. This made for quite the transition, as Tiki's flat stat boosts are pretty insane for the early game. With them, Alfred performed his typical role even better, that of moving forward, tanking hits, and two-shotting everything. After Chapter 8 though, the potential for true OHKOs became unlocked, with access to second seals letting us reclass Alfred into Berserker. The strength boost was enough to let him straight up one-shot the armors in Chapter 9 with a big hammer before engaging, then switch to Tiki and OHKO Kagetsu with Tail Smash. Fire Breath was also pretty funny, getting one of the Ivy kills with its burst damage. Normally, I consider this unsatisfying since you don't get the experience, but I learned to be okay with it for the sake of completing my personal goal of minimal turn routing. The early game wrapped up pretty well, OHKOing Hortensia in my Chapter 10 clear that defeated Hortensia turn 1, as well as some other generic enemies, while also weakening or even one-shotting nearby enemies with Fire Breath. Going into the Solm arc, I realized that OHKOs become a lot more difficult to hold up as enemies start promoting. Still, he was at least able to kill the frailer sages, as well as provide important damage to some difficult paralog bosses. Notably, I feel Lucina is always a bit tough to defeat when doing her paralog right away, but Tiki's Tail Smash almost defeated a full health bar on his own, and being in Berserker sets up chain attacks for everyone who goes after him. Also, enemies don't even fully start promoting until Chapter 17, so he was still able to dominate a fair amount of enemies in the Solm arc, like the Chapter 12 Fighters, Chapter 14 Thieves and Wolves, and the Chapter 13 Junk. Chapter 15 was a particularly strong showing for a Tiki tank, as I warped him into the Western Room turn 1 after breaking the wall with Demolish longbow strats. He OHKO'd multiple of the mages with Fire Breath, and started fighting enemies in the northern hallway before his engage meter ran out. Here, I learned an interesting lesson, in that Fire Breath's burst damage always goes through even if you miss the primary attack target, but you do have to initiate the Fire Breath strike, and a chain attack can essentially steal the kill. Weird, but sure, I guess. Regardless, he continued forward, clearing the way for an 8-turn clear that got all the chests. Chapter 16 was fairly similar, getting rescued forward turn 1 to get into the midst of battle, then taking out both Mage Knights turn 2 with Fire Breath. The Cavalier formation in the west is also perfect for Fire Breath, setting up Alfred to get all the kills on enemy phase while taking very little damage. Ultimately, I got a 7-turn clear while fully routing and getting the insane Recover Village. Chapter 17 was when I really started to shift towards relying on my 1-2 range enemy phase units, and I realized that something would need to change for Tiki Alfred to feel truly impressive. Still, he was able to help defeat Griss's group in the eastern section of Chapter 17 in time for my 5-turn clear that routed, and help with the Mavier and Marnie kills in time for my Chapter 19 3-turn clear that got both village rewards. Moving on to some paralogs, Micaiah may not be particularly challenging to kill, but Alfred's high damage output and HP, paired with low resistance, made for a pretty funny boss kill, making use of the Enchanter's effect that essentially gives counter magic. Once I got to the Sigurd paralog, though, everything changed for the better. At this point in time, I had gotten way more SP books than I knew what to do with, and I was able to inherit the costly but extremely valuable Reprisal Plus. This boosts our damage by 50% of the damage we've taken, and if you've noticed, Alfred's HP values have gotten pretty insane. This let him easily one-shot the Sage mini-bosses, and while I learned that skills don't apply to Fire Breath's burst damage, he was still strong enough to OHKO the Ishtar stand-in without Reprisal. Even unengaged, his damage output was absurd, matching Azura's capabilities of one-rounding armored enemies unassisted. The Erica paralog was also a good showing, tanking and one-rounding the heroes with Eternal Claw, then using all of his accrued damage to one-shot Erica and the final heroes. By Chapter 20, I realized that despite having an overall strong team, Alfred was one of my few options for speedy enemies like Swordmasters. At first, I opted to use his massive strength to just two-shot with a Brave Axe, switching Reprisal out for Divine Pulse to keep high hit rates in spite of using the hit-boosting engraves on other weapons. And I led the charge, but Alfred still pulled through for getting the Griss kills, no Reprisal necessary. With that, he already reached level 20, at which point I realized he had also reached his Berserker caps for Dex, Defense, and Resistance. To be honest, I did notice the Dex cap being an issue, since I pretty much always wanted Canter and Reprisal over Divine Pulse going forward, but as we'll see, the defense caps are actually kind of nice, giving a lower floor of damage received to maximize Reprisal damage, and not being ignored by Maddening's AI. For Chapter 21, Alfred was completely removed from the boss killing group, and I instead left him behind to kill the Wyvernite reinforcements. Because, why not, I guess. He was absolutely critical to my Chapter 22 clear, however, serving as a bulky unit that could be thrown into the middle of enemy formations that you're not really supposed to play aggressively against, given the intended lack of emblems. Turn 1, he killed the first 2 sages with Fire Breath, then had enough bulk to tank the Royal Knights and get some OHKOs. This was also the chapter where I realized Alfred was my answer to the Worms, with plus 40 damage from Reprisal, letting him straight up one-shot engage his bulkiest enemies. Even unengaged, Brave Axe with plus 30 or so damage went incredibly hard. In the end, playing aggressively with Alfred helped me get a 6-turn clear. During the Marth paralog, Alfred was unironically my best answer for killing the Secret Bulk Thief, and the Pack Ring paralog was pretty much a repeat of Chapter 22, getting a lot of huge Reprisal Plus kills while still having enough bulk to survive counterattacks, then switching to the Brave Axe to pick up kills when unengaged. I also switched him from a Brave Axe to a Silver Great Axe to kill Swordmasters, because just like Tail Smash and Flame Breath, the enemy gets to attack you first, setting up reprisal before you even attack. A bit of a messy map, but ultimately got a 9-turn clear. Chapter 23, however, I had a very precise clear for, getting a 3-turn while completely routing. Alfred's role was to sweep the northeast on his own, staying unengaged turn 1 to kill the Mage Knights and Bow Knights with a tomahawk. His defense cap also let him take damage from the Martial Masters, so he could kill them alongside Berserkers turn 1. Then, I had Alfred kill the 2 worms between turns 2 and 3 with a reprisal boosted Brave Axe. Chapter 24 didn't give Alfred much to do, as I went for a 2-turn semi-route, but being our Swordmaster killer was impactful for clearing out the starting area. And by chapter 25, Alfred was back to his typical self, getting warped into a large group of enemies, which he tanked, and then going on to obliterate worms with their accrued damage. Fire Breath was also pretty nice on the large formation of mobile enemies guarding Lumera, getting an OHKO against a Sage with a burst damage. And while his hit wasn't spectacular against Lumera herself, Fire Breath still got to kill the Meteor Sages. Ultimately, a 4-turn semi-route. Finally, we've come to chapter 26. Defeating Sombron's first phase in 1 turn is fairly simple, but I went for a turn 1 route. Similar to my Verdant Wind endgame 1 turn, the high offense of Berserker was very helpful for OHKOing multiple of these mini-bosses. He was of course the go-to Swordmaster killer, upgrading to an Erica engraved Ukunvasara for even more might, while still keeping decent hits and getting some pretty fun huge crit numbers. The damage taken from the Swordmaster was enough to let him take out one of Sombron's health bars, and then the damage from Sombron just barely let him scrape out the kill against the Martial Master. After the turn 1 route, Alfred led the right side. He OHKO'd the Genealogy mini-boss on turn 2, then OHKO'd the Thracia mini-boss turn 3 enemy phase. This set up for a turn 4 route, and though it took several other units to team up for the first Sombron kill, Alfred one-rounded the second and third, getting overkill crit damage with Eternal Claw in true Berserker fashion. Overall, this was probably one of my favorite experiences that I've had with the units. I know giving a unit Tiki is a common way to boost a unit's performance, which I definitely felt in the early game, as the huge stat boosts combined with Alfred's all-around solid physical stats let him demolish everything. As the playthrough progressed though, I kept thinking, eventually Tiki's got to fall off, right? However, I found that the trade-off of 1-2 range access for Fire Breath's burst damage was actually pretty fair, and once we got Reprisal, it was pretty much game over. Getting a 30 plus damage boost, while still being able to tank multiple enemies without being ignored by Maddening's AI, was pretty awesome, and safely one-rounding late-game worms on your own is no small feat. For improvements, I would consider switching to another physical class in the late game. Berserker was still nice for reaching OHKOs without Reprisal in the mid-game, but I would really have liked a higher dex cap. While Alfred's hit with axes was still fine with engraves, Tiki's weapons rely completely on your dex and luck. Also, Smash Plus was only ever a hindrance rather than a beneficial skill, and getting Merciless from Warrior would only further boost your damage to extreme heights. Just keep in mind that if you switch to Warrior, the higher defensive caps might lead to some weaker enemies ignoring you. I'd also suggest being a bit more mindful of engraves, so if you do want to make use of low-hit axes like the Brave Axe or Pole Axe, you don't have to worry about replacing Reprisal or Canter with Divine Pulse. And above all else, be sure to inherit build plus 5, so we can get Alfred's build in the 20s, and further satisfy his goal of being the beefiest barbarian out there. And that's it for now. Hopefully, I was able to demonstrate that you can have big fun numbers, while still making effective choices for achieving your personal goals. I'll admit that Berserkers have never exactly been my favorite units to use, but the ability to push their design concept to the max with reclassing, skills, and emblems has definitely given me a greater appreciation for the class. If you have any cool experiences with Berserkers throughout the series, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. I'm not quite so familiar with what you can do with Berserkers in the earlier games, and I know there's a lot more potential for the class in the modern games than what I presented. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.